Welcome to In Context, the podcast from St. Paul University where we explore the big questions that shape society. Today I spoke with Rajesh Shukla, a professor of philosophy, specifically at the School of Ethics and Public Affairs at St. Paul University. Together we explored notions of multiculturalism in Canadian society, what are its challenges, how do we think about multiculturalism today in a constantly evolving society? If you enjoyed this podcast, I strongly encourage you to add it to your favorite podcast platform, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And for our French listeners, and Francophiles, of course, please be aware that we have a sister podcast, USP en Conversation, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Come with me. We'll listen to Professor Shukla's take on multiculturalism in 2025. Rajesh Shukla, you are an associate professor in the School of Ethics and Public Affairs at St. Paul University. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. I deeply appreciate that.
This is great. So your research has brought you to explore the intersection of moral and political philosophy. And you've also been working on friendship and justice. But I think today we're going to look at your work on migration, immigration, and especially diaspora and multiculturalism. So allow me a first question, perhaps a naive one. Over the past decades, it seems like multiculturalism has gone through many definitions. And I think it's safe to say that multiculturalism is now pretty much accepted in Canada, in English Canada, essentially. And we can talk about Quebec a bit later. But what do we mean exactly when we say multiculturalism?
Yeah, so multiculturalism is used in different senses in different societies. And so the definition of the term, if you put it that way, is relative to the social context where it is being employed.
Right.
In Canadian context, we use the term in the sense of equality of cultures.
Okay.
Which means that all cultures that are present in the Canadian, social and political space are equally treated by the government, by the institutions of the government,
right,
as well as by the people of the country. That is the hope, at least, that there should be no discrimination, no differentiation, simply on the basis of culture. So all cultures are basically put on equal moral as well as political footing.
Right, and this is basically ensconced in the law. This is also practice. Obviously, there can be biases and racism in every instance of resistance, right, to migration in any society. But you're talking about the framework, the Canadian framework.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And can you tell us a bit about the attributes? I'm thinking of cultural diversity, dignity, freedom, autonomy that we find in Canadian society. How do they manifest themselves with this population that's migrating, that's arriving into Canada? Because not everyone has come from an egalitarian society.
Yes.
Not everyone has come from a place of free speech.
Yes.
Or tolerance.
Absolutely.
So how does being in Canada affect the various communities, and how do they adapt, and how do they also perhaps sometimes retreat onto themselves?
I think that's a great question, and if we think about it, it takes us back to the history of the country.
Right.
Because
how far are you going?
I can go as far as you allow me to go.
Sure.
But I would just, I guess, stipulate that In the early days of multiculturalism, assimilation and integration were the two main modes of, you can say, two new modes of adjusting to the new society, which was Canadian society. So if one was coming to Canada, then they were either expected to assimilate or integrate, depending on how the term is put.
Right.
But as multiculturalism, became stronger in the country and the times have changed, now the focus is more on cultural preservation of the immigrants, and not only the cultural preservation of a dominant group, but of ethnic groups as well. So what that does is that provides a conceptual as well as you can say normative space for the newcomers, that they can be who they are essentially in cultural terms,
Right.
and that they are not required to give up their cultural suppositions and cultural beliefs and cultural commitments.
Okay. So if I understand well, you've got stratified, a layered identity. And
Yeah.
You look at it as in terms of multiple identities.
Yes.
You are coming from a country with the background, with the culture, with the religion, but you're also trying to find your way into this new society and not necessarily assimilating,
Yeah.
but sometimes, but certainly trying to integrate.
I think that is something that needs to be explored, a little further, because even though the requirement of integration could be there, on paper,
Right.
but when it comes to the defining the term and working out its entailments, like integration in what sense? So, for instance, if we are looking at like a political integration, then of course every Canadian, new Canadian or old Canadian has one vote and has got a right to vote in federal, provincial, municipal, all sorts of elections. And so someone who is exercising their voting rights, someone who is exercising their political rights and social rights, they can be said to be very well integrated.
Right.
But if you transpose the same expectation in the cultural realm, then that can raise further questions, because going back to Pierre Trudeau, he was very explicit that Canada as a country itself has no particular culture, and that it is going to basically, encourage all cultures. So the more people, follow that or get in that space, then they start thinking that, there is no expectation for cultural integration, but only political and civic kind of integration. I think that there is, I think that argument kind of a bit oversells, because
Right.
because
we're a blank slate. We can be who we want to be, and of course, this was contested in Quebec, of course, because and by Indigenous peoples, and they're saying we're not a blank slate.
Yeah.
We have culture. We have clear
absolutely.
cultures and languages, and so it might have been a political move also to undermine the separatist movement that was emerging.
Oh, absolutely! Right? It was, and there is no doubt about it, because historians have shown it, and political scientists have shown it, that one of the reasons why multiculturalism, started so strong in Canada was the political support from the federal government, that wanted to sort of you can say diversify the debate, if I can put it that way, where there was not just rivalry between two founding nations, and of course the Indigenous people being on the margin, but there were other cultures as well. Please bear in mind that when the debate started, and when Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, put it that way, then he had in mind, what he had in mind was other European cultures like Irish, Germans, Ukrainians, and Hungarians, Russians. Like all these cultures were present in Canada, but the Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism basically just brushed them aside. And
so we're coming in the late 60s. We've got the commission, the Massey report of the various commissions.
Absolutely.
And we're defining Canada as a bilingual, bicultural nation.
Yeah.
Sort of forgetting about the Indigenous peoples at the time, later realizing, oh, okay, what have we done? And so we're in the 70s now, and you've got these policies looking towards multiculturalism to better define Canada, to open Canada's conception of itself.
I think
what happens, right?
I think that look, when it comes to when it comes to Canadian multiculturalism, of course, historical context is important, but it is, of course, important to where we are coming from, but it is also very important where we are going.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
So the thing is that if you look at the, different liberal democracies, and a lot of them try to adopt multicultural philosophy and multicultural ideas in the post-Second War period, post-Second World War, when the, intake of immigrants increased, when migration increased. But if you look at Europe, for instance, the debate on multiculturalism has become very intense, sometimes even, conflictual in nature.
It's politicized.
It has been politicized, thoroughly politicized, actually. But if we look at Canada, we have done relatively very well.
Okay.
There has been a political consensus on multiculturalism in the Anglosphere, if I may put it that way. And a little bit of disagreement that has come from Quebec on multiculturalism. But to me, it seems that the position of Quebec is not all that much different. It just requires a little bit of more historical understanding.
Right. For whom?
From I guess from immigrants as well as from the Anglo-Saxon community.
Right. So they're not resisting because they're intolerant. They're resisting because they don't frame it the same way.
Of course, because see, this is one of the challenges in multiculturalism, that if culture is important or if culture is as important as multiculturalist project it to be, then by all means Quebec has got a right, or Quebecers have got a right to project their culture on their institutions or on their forms of life.
Right.
So that is sort of given, but what happens is that multiculturalism is important, cultures are important, but along with that we have a host of liberal democratic values that are meant to constrain the manifestations of culture in public space. And multiculturalism and many multiculturalists have been deeply divided because they do not want to constrain culture in any form, theoretically. But when they see the practical manifestations of cultural beliefs in Quebec, and elsewhere, then they think, oh no, this goes a bit too far. This is not okay. This is not in agreement with multiculturalism. And then you wonder that you can't just pick and choose. If culture is important for the minorities, if minority culture is sacrosanct, then of course Quebecers are a minority in Canada in relation to Anglo-Saxon community, but they have got their own minority as well. And so it's a very complex sphere to navigate, because you want to emphasize that every community must respect the dignity and personhood of everybody. They don't have to be minority to be respected for that matter.
It's interesting how you frame this. You mentioned the Quebec French population as a minority within Canada, and this if we go back to the Commission in 1968, and well, the notion was that the founding nations were not minority nations, right? They were actually majority, so they were founding nations. So the Quebecers don't see themselves as a minority within Canada, but de facto, yes, in terms of numbers. So there's something really interesting here that you're touching upon, and it might have to do with we were talking about multiculturalism. What about transculturalism and the notion of cultural communities? This is something you hear a lot also in the Francosphere.
Yeah.
Cultural communities rather than multiculturalism per se as a model. How is this different? Just for anyone listening on and going listening in and thinking, wait a minute, why is it different?
Before I answer your question, if you may allow, I just want to go back to the
Sure.
previous point. That of course the multiculturalism has been conceived by two founding nations and was sort of, you can say, a compromise among the two nations that Canada going forward will be a bilingual country, but a multicultural society, and the two founding nations sort of agreed to that in some ways. What I mean by Quebec being in minority, that there are two aspects to that observation, at least to my mind. One is that of a demographic element, which is of course relatively far less than the English-speaking community. But the other aspect is that historically there has been always a risk to French language and
Right.
culture
Yeah.
that has been deeply felt in Quebec society. And that feeling of risk in a sea of, Anglophone culture in historical terms is what I meant, that there is a sort of, minorities feel the same way because they continuously feel that they are losing their history, they are losing their culture. And so in that sense, that was what I was alluding to.
course.
But of course, the multicultural, endeavor had started with the agreement of two founding nations and has played a critical role in the manifestation of the debate as well. Coming back to the notion of cultural communities, of course you can see a society, whether it is of ethnic community or whether it is of minority community or a racial community, one can put it in different ways. And they form their, own communities because those communities are easier to connect, I suppose, and easier to reach out to. And in that sense, every, cultural community is important. But what is also important is that the cultural community is one of the cultural community in a larger society. And so the interplay of cultures, the intercultural dialogue, if we see culture as constitutive of a community, it becomes extremely important in a country like Canada.
Right.
Because people have, different cultures, different ethnicities, different loyalties, different practices. And so it becomes very, very important that there is an element of openness to others, because if we shut that aspect, then we become a sort of like a self-enveloped cultural community running the risk of not being to progress and not being to reform and not being to able to reflect on one's own practices.
You're bringing up an interesting tension here. So how do you maintain your culture maintain that cultural identity and pursue those ties with family, with the nation we've left behind. When it's when it's felt, sometimes people don't want to have anything to do with what they've left behind, but also open up enough to function within this new society, and also be aware, listen into, and sensitive to various realities. So you're bringing up extremely important mechanisms and tensions at play. How do we navigate this? So what are some examples that we see in society that allow us to interact, to have that fundamental dialogue?
So I think that culture is important aspect of human life. There is no two opinion on that. Like culture plays an important role. I say sometimes that culture is like an accent. You can't get away from it. You will carry it in some form, one way or the other. So it is very important to respect cultures. It is very important to respect the people who practice different cultures and take culture for its intrinsic, properties, moral worth, goodness that it comes with. Having said that, I also add that cultural beliefs, cultural convictions, and cultural ties should not be treated as sacrosanct.
Okay.
Because
what do you mean by that?
Because in the sense that cultural beliefs, cultural ties, cultural attachments should be conversation starters. They should not close a conversation. What is the difference? The difference is that if we take culture as seriously as we think we do in a multicultural society, then we should be able to know about other cultures. We should be able to understand other cultures. But we can't do that if the doors to criticism and reflection are completely closed.
Could you give us examples of those doors being closed, and by whom? Is it within the communities themselves? Or is it just, generally?
I think as Canadians, we are very, we are very sensitive to being judged.
Right.
And we do not want to judge any culture. And we do not want to judge any cultural belief. And I think that's a great thing.
So we're tolerant.
We are super tolerant. And that's tolerance is a great attribute of a multicultural society. And we are very tolerant in that sense. But what I mean, if you ask me, is that what I am alluding to is that multiculturalism as a philosophy of cultural respect has to watch out sometimes. Otherwise, it will, slide into cultural relativism sort of thing.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
And that means that if a practice is defended on cultural grounds, then no critique can be offered. Because offering the critique itself becomes intolerance.
Okay.
And for someone who is so sensitive to critique, any critique will become intolerant. And the challenge there is that if we take that line of thought, if we become, a sort of like a society where every culture is left to the community to stipulate its attributes and parameters, then we deprive ourselves of intercultural dialogue.
Absolutely.
And on the other hand, we should not forget that every culture has a minority within itself.
Of course. Yeah.
And so when we say that, okay, we are not going to partake in this debate, that we have left those minorities basically on their own and to fend for themselves within that culture. So I don't see culture as a monolithic supposition where a culture speaks for itself, and that we have to keep it ourselves at arm's length and not interfere or not say anything.
Right.
But what I am trying to get at is that we should be able to criticize, we should be able to comment on cultures, but do so in a sympathetic and respectful way, so that when the comment is made, when the observation is made, then you know where I'm coming from. And the goal is to improve, the goal is to reform, and the goal is to progress. And all we have to do that to justify this argument is to look back in history, because a lot of practices have been defended culturally. As a liberal Democrat, I find that extremely hard sometimes to accept. For instance, in India, like child marriage was a cultural tradition.
Right.
Child marriage was a cultural tradition. So if we take a sacrosanct view of culture, then we can't interfere with that process. But we do. Even in India, they have outlawed that.
Right.
So
we've outlawed it here as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have done that here as well.
Without judgment.
Without judgment, exactly.
But at the same time, in order to ensure, if I'm understanding well, in order to ensure a cultural dialogue, an intercultural dialogue, in order to ensure a healthy relationship amongst various diaspora, rather than having diasporic enclaves, you open them up a tiny bit so that we actually understand each other.
Absolutely.
But obviously, as a polite Canadian, I bristled at your thought that I might criticize, someone else's culture. But I understand what you're saying. Basically, let us have a dialogue. Let us figure out how to live together successfully and create an extraordinary society. It is evolving. What are the main challenges with multiculturalism today? Any thoughts?
Look, when it comes to challenges in multiculturalism, particularly in Canada, then you look at the social world and you see that the problems of equity, justice, discrimination, these are the problems that are reported by the ethnic communities and individuals who have particular experiences.
Right.
But those are, to me, more of individual problems. When it comes to the society itself, then we have to see that where we are at this point of time, a lot of changes are occurring all over the world. And the arrival of newcomers today is much different in terms of history. Like, people are coming with expectations as professionals. So for instance, if you look at Canadian intake, then 70% or more of Canadian immigrants are coming under skilled labor category, which means they are coming here as a professional. Right. Now, for them, the question is not that of direct discrimination or lack of equity. For them, the challenge is primarily of is with some of the policies that are historically embedded but somewhat outdated in the current context.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. For instance, like, we take immigrants on the basis of their, intellectual, linguistic, records and performance, degrees, certificates. But none of them, those certificates, hold good in equal measure when they arrive in Canada, because the Canadian standards are different. The Canadians, experiences are different. Training is different. So there is a difference between the training that we provide here and abroad. Now, for those immigrants, and for those newcomers, it would be important if we can streamline our policies, that there is a clear pathway to entry in the workforce. So someone who is a physician, for instance, or someone who is a nurse, like they can have a defined pathway to workforce.
So how can we help them? How can we
And
set in place programs?
That will require policy changes, and sometimes they do not understand, because they will treat in their mind that could be a form of discrimination.
Okay.
And I have had this conversation, and I said, like, do you know that if you are a registered trainee in British Columbia, you can't work in Quebec?
Right.
So it's not necessarily a issue of discrimination. It's just that of a red tape, you can call it, maybe.
Deep, incredible bureaucracy.
Incredible bureaucracy.
Right.
So I think that one of the areas that needs attention is that how do we integrate people in the workforce, because once we integrate people in the workforce, then the question of equity is automatically addressed in a fundamental way.
Right.
So I would say that is there, and that needs to be, probably can be done. And there are a lot of challenges that just are historical, global in nature, and some of them just come with the debate. And I've been I don't know what to make of it. In Europe, if you look at the issue of far right, far left is significant issue. I do not see that problem at all in Canada. Canada is blessed to have a political system which is far more stable and far more, you can say,
Very centrist.
Centrist and immigrant friendly. So there are a lot of I say that Canadian multiculturalism has numerous virtues, but also there are areas of improvements that I just outlined where it can benefit.
Well, thank you for bringing this to our attention and for being quite clear about it. I really appreciate you talking, off the cuff and with great passion and honesty. Professor Rajesh Shukla, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you.